Artlist.io.
He, as we are here on episode 21, the 21st edition of Ginormous, and welcome to the show you live for, where it includes the first ever State of Ginormous address. Now, I would like to say thank you on a serious note to everybody who is listening. I hope everyone's having a great day this Thursday, December 4th, 2025, and it is 1:03 p.m. I hope everybody has had a great December so far. Christmas season's coming up. We're going to be doing all of our shopping soon and in the middle of it right now. So let's get into what we want to talk about today. I would like to talk about college football playoff rankings, but a lot of talk also just about my general mindset on how I think the state of college football is right now. And there's going to be some negative, but there's also going to be some positive, because while a lot of people have been talking about college football as of late, obviously they talk about how much they love it and they come from a very passionate point of view. But a lot of it does kind of tend to go on the negative side of things. And one goal that I had when I started the show was to try to give as much positivity as I can, to kind of give a different perspective and not necessarily a contrarian one, or one that goes against the consensus. I'd say 95% of the time, because the consensus, not to sound like Max Keller in here, but the consensus is the consensus for a reason. And I don't like to go against the grain and sound like a Skip Bayless who goes crazy all of a sudden and has all these hot takes. I like to at least look at things from a certain point of view. But, look, that's enough blabbering. Let's get into what we want to talk about today. And let's go into the college football top 25. So I want to go, and I'll read 1 through 15 here, because I really believe that, 1 through 15 are really the only ones that can really state a case at this point. Obviously, there will be some group of 6 like James Madison, Tulane, maybe even North Texas, Memphis, who can make the playoffs or who will get the playoffs, especially under certain circumstances. But let me read the top 15 off to you. If you don't know already, this came out the other day. OSU, Indiana at 2, Georgia 3, 4 Texas Tech, 5 Oregon, 6 Ole Miss. I'm very happy about that. 7 Texas A&M, 8 OU, 9 Bama, 10 Notre Dame, 11 BYU, 12 Miami, 13 Texas, 14 Vanderbilt, and 15 Utah. Now, I don't have a lot of faith in Utah to pull this off, to be honest with you, and get in the college football playoff, but I think that they are a long shot. Kind of one of those teams, almost like in the NFL, where in week 17 you're still in the hunt, but you need almost a mathematical impossibility for you to get in. But they have kind of a puncher's chance, if you even want to call it that, to get in the playoffs. They're in the discussion. Some people are vouching for them, as long, obviously, as the coaches are as well, and as they should be. I mean, why wouldn't you want to vouch for your team? But there are a couple things with this top 25 that I wanted to get into. A lot of this has been discussed already, but I would love to give my 2 cents on it as well. I'm looking at this right now, and it's going to be really cool. For the first time in Big Ten history, in their conference championship, it will be the 1 seed versus the 2 seed. Obviously, even though Indiana has had a fantastic, marvelous year, they look great, and they could very easily win the national championship if things go their way, I'm still not sure they have the pieces, really, or the horses to keep up with OSU. I'm not necessarily sure that anybody does. Obviously, they have as good a chance as anybody to the number 2 team in the country for a reason. But Indiana is a team that is built off of around their quarterback. They have really good depth everywhere you look around their roster, and they're a very complete, sound team. That's what I really like about them. When I watched them face Wisconsin, you could just tell that they were just so well coached, and just everything about them, all facets of the game, were taken very seriously. There really isn't a big weakness. And like I said, they do have a lot of talent. They have somebody who might go number 1 overall in the draft in 2026 in Fernando Mendoza. So obviously they have the pieces in order to become a top 2 team in the country. I just think that the gap between OSU and everybody else is pretty big. And when it comes to making a national championship pick at this point in the season, usually you would want to pick the field. because you have just so many options to choose from now that you have 12. And, you just want to pick the field, and sometimes the consensus doesn't always win. But you know what? I think this is one of those times where you're going to pick against the field, and we go with OSU here. In my opinion, Ohio State is going to win this game, and unfortunately, I think they're going to win the national championship. Now, anything can happen, but that right there is kind of just my 2 cents on that matter. But looking into a little bit of these rankings and kind of how I feel, I'm looking at the top 15 here, which is eventually going to become the top 12. One thing that I want to point out at first is I'm seeing Vanderbilt ahead of Texas ahead of Vanderbilt, Texas being at 13, Vanderbilt being at 14. And I'm going to say something, and I don't want to sound hypocritical for a complaint that I make a little bit later on in this show, but I'm looking at this and I see Texas sitting at 9-3, 3 losses. Realistically, could be 5 losses, could be 7-5, and Vanderbilt is sitting at 10-2 for the first time in that program's history. First of all, great for them. Clark Lee has done an amazing job, and I'm really happy that he's going to be staying in Vanderbilt for the foreseeable future. I really can't wait to see what goes on with that program. And they ended up getting the #1 college recruit to flip his commitment from Georgia to him. I believe his name was Jared Curtis. So great for them, kind of like a Bryce Underwood situation, leaving LSU or decommitting from LSU to go to Michigan. So once again, really great for them. I'm happy that they're getting players that's going to put them in the right direction, or at least seemingly so. But I understand that earlier in the year, Texas and Vanderbilt faced off against each other, and Texas really beat them handily. It didn't really look all that close. The scoreboard was not really an indicator of how much of an uncompetitive game that was. But at the end of the day, even though Texas has some really impressive wins like the Red River against OU, they defeated Texas A&M, handing them their one and only loss so far of the season. And once again, they beat Vanderbilt, who's in the middle of a great season themselves. I don't understand how a team that has 3 losses, one especially to Florida, that's really not great. You go to overtime against Kentucky and Mississippi State, two of the bottom feeding teams in the SEC, and you just barely scrape by against them. Obviously, yeah, you lose against OSU. That's kind of that's really a loss that can be forgiven because at this point, really, there's no shame in losing to Ohio State. But at the end of the day, they are 9-3, and I understand that the committee kind of wants these big names in there to kind of make the college football playoff picture look as sexy as possible. I do understand that, but at some point in time, also, there does need to be kind of some common sense that the record is the record. Vanderbilt is an underdog team for the ages here because we've never seen this out of Vanderbilt quite literally in their history. And yeah, look, they lost the head-to-head matchup, but they have the better record, and they have some really impressive wins on their resume as well. It's not like Texas and Vanderbilt are in different conferences. They're both in the SEC. They're both teams that kind of have to face that gauntlet, fight that gauntlet every single year. And again, Texas is no slouch whatsoever. Arch Manning, even though he's been very up and down this season, has shown flashes and shown improvement as to why a lot of people were having him the early or preseason Heisman candidate favorite, and why a lot of people were naming Texas the #1 team in the country during the preseason before it started. There's a reason why week 1, Ohio State versus Texas, had so much hype to it, because people really thought that Texas was going to be on that dominant level of Ohio State University. That didn't necessarily work out. That doesn't mean that they're bad, but at the same time, they have severely underperformed what their expectations were, and they also almost have 5 losses on the season. 2 of them, well, one of them's really bad. 2 of them that would have been even worse. 2 of them to, like I said, potentially Mississippi State and then Kentucky. 2 teams that, again, are bottom feeders and do not look as though they necessarily have a lot of hope right now of escaping the basement of the SEC. So I don't really understand why the committee feels as though Texas should be ranked ahead of Vanderbilt, and I have a reason to believe that if it comes down to it, if they had to pick one of those 2 teams to get in, because for whatever reason 1 through 12 has an opening, and they have to put one of those teams at 13 and 14 in, I have a feeling that the committee is going to favor Texas, and I think that's BS. I really, really do think that that's BS. Again, I understand the head-to-head matchup between the 2, but at what point are we going to value the record? At what point are we going to look at this and say, hey, look, Texas, you just really underperformed. Vanderbilt, you really overperformed. We're going to give this to Vanderbilt. We're going to give this to Vanderbilt. I don't really understand. Maybe this is all going to be inconsequential at the end of the day because Vanderbilt and Texas both might miss it. But I think if it comes down to it, there may be a scenario where one of those two teams get to be in. And if the committee all of a sudden decides that the team with more losses and potentially 5 losses or close to 5 losses on the year gets over a 10-2 Vanderbilt, I think that's going to be a bunch of BS. And that's kind of what I have to say about that. And I don't understand what it's going to take for Vanderbilt to have to get into that level where they get to that kind of name brand as Texas. And don't forget, Texas is just recently, in the last 3 years, involved in the SEC. So it's not like they have this huge pedigree. They were in the Big 12 for a long time. So let's not ignore that either. Let's not ignore that. They're relative newcomers to the SEC, and then all of a sudden, just because Steve Sarkisian, Arch Manning are there, they're going to be getting this stuff favored over Vanderbilt, who's been there forever? I don't think so. I don't think that's fair. I mean, maybe a lot of people here disagree with me, but that's what I have to say about that. Obviously, moving on here, one of the big controversies here in the top 15, especially top 25 especially, is going to be how Miami is ranked at 12 and Notre Dame is ranked at 10. Now, kind of earlier I said I don't want to be contradicting myself because I do understand when I was talking about Texas and Vanderbilt that the head-to-head matchup, it was in favor of Texas, and I don't understand why they're ranked ahead of Vanderbilt. But I'm going to kind of approach it at a different angle here with Miami, Notre Dame. They both have very similar records, and they both are now in the top 12. If it were to end today, obviously you would have Miami at 12, Notre Dame at 10. A lot of things are going to change with the conference championship games, which I will also get into, especially with the ACC. This is where I question the committee as well, because, again, juxtaposed to my argument, how can you rank Miami ahead of Notre Dame when, even if it was week 1 and the game was at the end of August, how can you sit here and how can you rank Miami behind a team that they beat? They beat Notre Dame. Again, it was week 1. Notre Dame has won out the rest of their season, and they've done what they needed to do. But at the end of the day, you're asking, even though I understand that Notre Dame is an independent, so this necessarily doesn't apply, the college football scene is trying to promote non-conference games and competitive non-conference games, and that's why they're really pushing for it, and it's something that they're really looking forward to seeing. And that's kind of what Miami's trying to do. They're going out on a limb here. They were, going into the season, I believe that they were top 10 seeded during the preseason. So they go, look, we're going to go up week 1 against the team that made the national championship last year. They won, and how they get rewarded with that at the end of the year is by being behind Notre Dame. Look, Wisconsin is my number 1 team, but I really like the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. I like to follow them. I like to see what's going on, and I like to keep track, and I really get happy when they're successful because, in my opinion, they're just a good and a fun team to watch. But I have to acquiesce here when stuff like this happens. It's not fair, and I really do believe that Notre Dame does get a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. And look, they have some good wins. They have 2 ranked wins on the season, but other than that, their losses were against Miami, who was ranked, and then Texas A&M, who before their loss against Texas last week was a top 3 team, the number 3 team in the country. So honestly, I don't want to say that Texas A&M sucks because obviously they do not, but looking at it, Texas A&M fell from 3 to 7, and at this point in the season when things are so tight, if you're going to fall 4 spots in the conference or in the college football playoff rankings, I think that should be also taken into account when it comes to Notre Dame, because now we can no longer say Notre Dame lost to the number 3 team in the country. We can say they lost to the number 7 team. And at this point, when things are so tight, kind of like needle in the haystack, and you're really trying to make those difficult decisions, I really think that that's something that you need to take into account. Now, once again, Notre Dame has better losses than Miami. Miami has lost to SMU. They've lost to Louisville. So obviously those conference losses are kind of impactful. And this is where Notre Dame kind of has that edge, which, I think for in terms of like aesthetic wise, I think it's really cool that a team is going to be independent and they can kind of go all over the college football scene. They can play who they want, they can play different conferences. I think it's really interesting. They're kind of like a joker and it makes for really interesting matchups. But at the end of the day, if the committee and when the committee takes conference rankings so much into account when they're trying to make decisions on who is in and out of the college football playoffs, I think that that should work more to your disadvantage. And obviously, when it comes to the head to head stuff, the committee has not taken that into account because 10 is Notre Dame and 12 is Miami when Miami has beaten Notre Dame this season head to head. So that doesn't really make sense to me. I don't really understand how the committee in their heads is able to justify how you can say, okay, Notre Dame doesn't have the benefit of having a conference record to go off of. So what do they do to compensate for that? That to me, or to anybody it seems, has not been fully explained, and I would really like to hear the explanation for that. Like, I know that they have a lot of criterias that they go off of. I know that, they really kind of list it all out, especially with when it comes to Ole Miss. They're like, okay, key players, key coaches, this is how we do this. If they're lost, that if they lose those guys, then you know what, this is what it's going to be. Like, this is how we'll decide. I get that they do that, but I just don't understand again what the criteria is for Notre Dame to be ranked over Miami. I guess if you want to say that the losses to Notre Dame or that Notre Dame has sustained not only were early in the season, but they were against Miami, who's ranked, Texas A&M, who is ranked, so they have two quote unquote quality losses as opposed to Miami. But I don't understand how you justify having Miami behind Notre Dame. I don't understand it. Again, personally, I'm kind of happy to see it because I like seeing Notre Dame in these advantageous positions. But I do have to be objective here. It doesn't make sense and it's not fair. And if I was a Miami fan and I was the Miami coach and athletic director, I'd be heated. I'd be really mad, and nobody can really blame them. If they end up missing out, especially since they didn't even get a chance, which I'm going to get into in a minute, to be in their conference championship game in favor of Duke, who's 7-5. To me, Miami's really getting the short end of the stick here, and I don't know. I think they have a real big case to kind of make some sort of complaint, kind of file some sort of grievance. I mean, I don't really know how much that will help or what it will really do, but I really think Miami has a strong case here to really say that they've been put in a disadvantage situation, especially if guys behind them, like Texas, who has 3 losses on the season, and I wouldn't say Vanderbilt. I'll kind of keep Vanderbilt out of that. If somehow, some way, somebody who is out of the top 12 right now usurps them. So kind of sticking to the Miami theme, I want to get into how the ACC really believes that Duke somehow, some way is included in their formula of who gets qualified for the ACC championship game. So for those who don't know, it is going to be Virginia, who is 10-2, I believe. Forgive me if I have that incorrect. And versus Duke, who is 7-5. Now, we can look at Virginia, we can look at Duke, or in Miami, and we can say that the committee is working off of the conference record, which, in Duke's fairness, they are 6-2, which is a very important criteria for the committee to go off of. But again, I want to know the explanation from the ACC how they formulate this, because the ACC, they make these decisions on their own. They kind of formulate in the criteria for who's gonna be in their conference championship game. I want to know how they sat down with a straight face and said, we do not believe that Miami is qualified to compete in this ACC championship game. And again, if Duke wins, they may not have any representation in the ACC. And I'm not trying to, demolish. I'm not trying to diminish anything that James Madison or Tulane or Memphis or North Texas have done this year. But are you seriously trying to tell me that the ACC with a straight face wants the best representation for this conference in the college football playoffs, so they put Duke in there, which then adds a possibility of nobody from their conference making it to the college football championship game. College football playoffs. That to me is incompetence, and that to me is embarrassing. I don't understand it. I don't really get where they're coming from there. And once again, these are kind of two things, like a double whammy, that's going against Miami. Because they right now have to be the biggest Virginia fans in the world. Because then that means, again, if Duke wins, then they might possibly not have anybody from the ACC getting involved. And honestly, if I was Miami, I, I haven't talked about really on this show how I feel about super conferences, but if I was Miami, I would make a move to the SEC. If the ACC doesn't end up getting any representation, Duke somehow wins, and then the college football bracket is even more in disarray than what it is right now. If I was Miami and somehow, someway they don't get in because one, Notre Dame's ranked ahead of them, and two, Duke made it over them in their own conference championship game, I would go to the SEC. And I would, again, it would be way overpowering. It would be, once again, feeding into the super conferences. But you know what? At this point, I don't know how much I care. I would be selfish because you know what? Nobody has been doing them any favors. And not that anybody is owed any favors, but I do believe that Miami, despite how they've kind of played down the stretch here, has earned their way into the college football playoff. And if they get screwed, then I would move. I would move. I think the ACC right now is a sad enough conference as it is. They've had a lot of guys and a lot of teams that have underperformed. A lot of people were picking Clemson to be the national championship contenders, if not the national champions. They obviously did not meet up to expectations this year. And you're telling me that you can't even make it to your own conference championship game over a team that's 7-5? Nope. I would take my ball and I would go home. I would. And I'm not a sore loser like that. But at a certain point in time, you have to realize when you're being screwed. And you know what? You just got to call it quits and call it a day and realize that there just may not be any winning in this situation. And it's time to leave something that is incompetent. One more quick thing. I am really, really happy that Ole Miss is still ranked in the top 7. Obviously, here they're ranked at 6. I'm really happy. And this is something that I'm going to talk about later on this week. We are going to have my first ever Ginormous guest. It'll be Dom Hausberger, one of my really good buddies. So I'm not going to really get into all the material that we're going to talk about on that show. But with the departure of Lane Kiffin, which happened over the weekend, going to LSU, I'm really, really happy that the committee, even though, once again, I'm talking about how they're going against their criteria, I think in a way they're doing it for good here by keeping Ole Miss in the top 6, kind of not diminishing anything that they've done this season, and still giving them a chance to see through the work that they've put through this season and seeing if they're still able to make some noise. I'm really happy that the committee has done that. I'm happy and I'm looking forward to see what Ole Miss can do this season, especially with the cards that they've been dealt. And, maybe they do win, maybe they don't win, but they deserve the opportunity to showcase if they could. And I'm really glad that they're able to do that. So, one last thing I would love to talk about is kind of the window here, and kind of as a lane shift, no pun intended. I'm really upset with how the calendar right now is formatted with college football, because you look at it and you see right now that National Signing Day has happened. High school recruits have gone on, and I understand that in-season recruiting high school people, okay, whatever, that is what it is. But at the same time, we're having a mid-season transfer portal right as the playoffs are going to start, and players and coaches are going to have to make a decision based off of the transfer portal and roster building that they're going to do if they want to go to a new team. Right now, they have to make that decision. Now, Lane Kiffin is a whole nother story because, the way he went about it and his destructive nature in his past didn't really give him a lot of sympathy with other people. But there are so many other examples of the SEC coaches, especially this year, how it's kind of been swamped with new coaches. There have been a lot of examples of guys who had to leave these teams because guess what? They have to build their teams in the future. And I just don't think that that's a fair and advantageous position, not only to put the coaches in, but the players as well. Like, you're telling me that you're a player who really was excited to play under Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, and then just to find out that all of a sudden he's leaving, and you have to pack up and in mid-season perhaps make a different commitment. That to me is a problem with the structure of the college football calendar. I don't understand how we've come to the collective decision that the best way to make these drastic team roster building moves is to do it in the middle of when the most important part of the season is starting. I don't understand how we've kind of come to that conclusion that that's really the best way to structure it. I don't necessarily trust that it is going to change either. Pardon me, sorry. I don't necessarily anticipate that it's going to change, which is really unfortunate. But we're just going to have to see where it goes because, again, I just think it's really messed up that these kids. I mean, that's what they are. They're kids. They're not even allowed to have a legal drink yet, and you're telling me that they're going to have to make a decision on whether or not they still want to go to the coach and the college that they committed for, or if they were going there just because of the coach, and then if they'll have to decommit, pack up, and leave, and then they'll be stuck. And then you can say the same thing about the coaches. Like these programs and the kids, everything all together, kind of the whole collective, machine that is a team and a program, is being put at a massive disadvantage. And I just don't understand how something does not get changed. Again, like I'm kind of not talking about a lot of things with this because there's a lot of stuff that I want to hold off on until I talk with Dom Hausberger about it. But I would just like to say that I'm happy that I talked about a lot of this stuff today. I do have to get to work pretty soon, so that is going to be the end of Ginormous. This is episode number 21. I hope everyone has had a magnificent day. I hope everyone has a magnificent rest of your week. And this has been Ginormous.